Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here again. This is our last day of T.S. Eliot. I know it's been quite a ride. But it's been a great pleasure to go over this stuff with you. I hope you found it as rewarding as I have. So we'll finish up today, and we made it through right on schedule, amazingly. We made it through part 3 last time. So part 4, do you remember we ended with that quote from St. Augustine, burning, burning, burning. O Lord, thou pluckest me out. Or, O Lord, thou pluckest burning. And then death by water, part 4. So in the previous sections, let's just sort of recap. In part 1, section 1, we're roasting in the desert, in Ezekiel's desert, in Isaiah's desert. In part 2, we're stifled by the perfume. In part 3, we're trapped in the fire. And in part 4, we drown. And in part 4, it's a great little section. Eliot, and people don't typically know how to take this section. They find it sort of obtuse. I don't at all. It's Eliot's invention of a myth, and it's an overtly didactic myth. In other words, it's a myth that contains that quintessentially American outreach, that Whitmanian outreach to the reader. Eliot in Proof Rock, let us go then, you and I, as evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. It's this invitational quality, this recognition of the reader. And Eliot goes overtly didactic here and overtly admonitory. It's a warning, right? Well, who were the Phoenicians? The Phoenicians, the earliest exponents and exporters of culture and commerce. They were sort of where the West began, historically speaking, culture and commerce, from which capital emerged. And this is historically true. They invented the alphabet, which was in turn spread by their sailors, by commerce. So they have the language and then the commerce, and the commerce spreads the language, and the language allows the commerce to spread, and culture is created. I mean, in a certain sense, they're the founders of the West, in a way that even the Greek surpasses even the contributions of the Greeks and the Romans and the Latins. The section presents the founding sailor of Western civilization. It's a made-up name, Phlebas. There's no guy named Phlebas who's a historical personage. It's Eliot making it up. And he's a fortnight dead. So he's been dead for a couple of weeks. And the idea is Phlebas the Phoenician never quite completed his journey, right? The journey of the West. ended in disaster. He's drowned. He never made it to where he was going to go. He set sail to found the Western tradition. But if what is here in this post-World War I universe, if what is here in the West is any indication, if what the values of the West have brought us to, right? Christianity, capitalism, industrialism. If those values are any indication, he must have never made it, because we've created a civilization that is a kind of living hell. And I remember thinking, just in the lee of World War I, you see in Flavis an image of the failure of possibility on the cultural level. Here's what's forgotten: our hopes and dreams as a culture, as a tradition, our ambitions. There's that term, the profit and loss, right? Our quotidian concerns, our dreams, our aspirations, our ambitions, our daily concerns, all forgotten. And you remember, think back to the Madame Sosostris prophecy. Sosostris, who is so confused and so confusing and so incomplete and so unreliable, turns out death by water was exactly what we should have feared. Phlebas is Eliot's last warning. His eyes are not pearls. His bones are not of coral made. I'm referring to The Tempest. Excuse me. I'm referring to the Tempest, which is exactly what Madame Sosostris refers to. But the transformation we see down here with Phlebas, who's been 2 weeks under the water, is not a wondrous transformation. It is not a marvelous transformation. It's the bad transformation. It's death, it's decay, it's ruin. It's ruin, culturally speaking. And Eliot goes, as I said earlier, Eliot goes overtly didactic in tone here. He's saying, you who are sailing your own lives, you who man the helm, you who woman the helm of your own lives, be careful, because you can drown too. Gentile or Jew, O you who turn the wheel and look to windward, consider Phlebas, who was once as handsome and tall as you. You who are guiding your own ship of self and your own ship of family and your own ship of institutional life and your own ship of community and your own ship of culture, you are vulnerable, as we all are. That is your human condition. And it's an explicit warning. Okay, and it takes us to the overwhelmingly profound final section of this great poem, What the Thunder Said. Now, think about that title, What the Thunder Said. So the last section is a kind of complex articulation of the profound yet inarticulate, the thunder. What wisdom resides in the thunder? So the final section introduces itself as a kind of hermeneutic challenge, right? It's a challenge to our urge to figure out what's going on, to figure out what this is all about. to see the meanings in this language that is so ineffable, apparently ineffable to us, the thunder. Where is the wisdom in the thunder? What does it tell us? So the title configures this section as a hermeneutic act, an act of interpretation, fraught with key point, an act of interpretation, a figuring out of meaning, but one fraught with ambiguity, fraught with complexity, fraught with contradiction, apparently irresolvably so. Okay? The thunder is the thunder of spring, the thunder of April, right? So first line of the poem. And it prompts a question, right? The thunder promises, the spring promises a reign of regeneration. In other words, April's spring. But it prompts a question. Is this promise of regeneration, this promise of redemption, this promise of renewal, this possibility of rebirth, this promise of resurrection, all those words with their spiritual and psychological and biological meanings, right? Is this promise cruel, as Eliot proposes that it is in the very first line of the poem? In that, is it cruel in that the saving reign of redemption will never come, will only be adumbrated endlessly by this thunder that never crystallizes into consummation, this promise that never crystallizes into the actual, beyond the ideal, beyond the hoped for, beyond the prayed for, beyond belief, beyond faith, into actuality. Is the thunder to be, and this is line 342, is the thunder to be, line 342, quote, a dry, sterile thunder without rain, the thunder of the desert? Or, on the other hand, is the thunder evidence of a coming redemption upon which we can place our faith justifiably? So part 5 presents two oppositional visions of the end toward which civilization is tending. Fancy word for this, toward the eschatological end, toward the end of things. How will this end? What will the end game be? Thinking of Beckett's great existentialist play. What is the end game? Thinking of Shakespeare's explorations of the ends of things, the tragic ends and the comic things. Comic, not ha-ha, but comic as in faith renewed, promise restored, love being granted potency and success. Which of these ends will it be? Will it be, on the one hand, a terrible termination, or on the other hand, life-giving renewal? Now, it's important for you to realize, as you're reading this, don't get frustrated, because in this poem, he's presenting both sides, and neither really happens in the world of the poem. Do you see what I'm saying? He's leading us, Eliot is, toward an ambiguity, toward a question, toward a balance, toward a conundrum, toward an enigma. He's imagining the apocalyptic alternatives and presenting them eschatologically to us. So the negative apocalypse, let's look at what that looks like. Up to this point, the poem has construed the wasteland as a symbolic place. In other words, a land, a waste land. It's presented this as a symbolic place throughout. Like Dante's Inferno, it's a place, it's a locale, it's a geography, right? It's a topology. It's a place in which both private and public culture, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual culture have been desiccated and withered. In part 5, the wasteland becomes a fully symbolic time as well, a time of apocalypse now, quoting from Francis Ford Coppola's great film's title. A time of apocalypse now, a time of Dante's Inferno now, a hell of our own making. A Christ, from this great Christian writer, T.S. Eliot, a Christ, a principle of healing, a principle of regeneration, a principle of restoration is absent, not risen. The world becomes located terminally in a symbolic time, and it's quite explicit in the poem, a symbolic time between crucifixion and resurrection, emotionally and psychologically wiped out, with nothing to hope for, nothing to bring vitality of any kind. So, first stanza, we begin with images sampled from 2 New Testament locales, and I suspect many of you recognize these right away. The first is Gethsemane. That's the place where the man Jesus looked up at his God and said, "Let this cup pass from my lips. I don't want to drink. Don't make me." Eliot has this great line, line 323, the frosty silence in the gardens. Whose silence? God's failure to answer. Gethsemane, a locale, absolutely mythic. In other words, by mythic, I don't mean untrue. By mythic, I mean of looming symbolic significance in Western culture, right? Gethsemane. A locale of doubt, symbolically speaking, a locale of doubt, of fear. Let this cup pass from my lips. Doubt, fear, uncertainty, and finally, betrayal and death. And we see the line on line 328 in the stanza. He who was living is now dead, which is Golgotha, right? The site of Jesus's crucifixion, a locale in which what is best in us, symbolically speaking, what is best in us, in other words, the God that lives in all of us, what is best in us is put to death. So the stanza associates Jesus's condition, which is crucified, dead, with our own as individuals and as members of a culture at large. Okay, that takes us to the second stanza. It's a 2-part stanza. In part 1, notice the lack of punctuation. This stanza and the next becomes a litany of prayers gone mad, full of desperation. The stanza generates nightmarish images of aridity, exhaustion, and desperate ill will. The wasteland desert cannot even offer silence or solitude, which is why we went into it for 40 days and 40 nights in the first place. But silence and solitude is not even available to us there. And the second part of the stanza, which starts on line 346, it almost looks like another stanza, but it's not, right? Line 346, see the long break there? Presents a wistful, yearning vision of a different world where faith is occasionally gratified, but the vision is a mirage. Note, a protasis. You guys know the grammatical term, protasis? and apodosis always follows protasis. Protasis is the if clause, if. And apodosis is the proposition, that always has to follow the if clause. Well, look at the number of ifs. What are there, 4 ifs, 5 ifs in this stanza, followed by no apodosis, right? There's no conclusion. There's no then to match the ifs. The third stanza, we have reference to, famous stanza, reference to this third, a third, right? Who is the third who walks always beside you? When I count, there are only you and I together. But when I look ahead up the white road, there's always another one walking beside you, gliding wrapped in a brown mantle, hooded. I do not know whether a man or a woman, but who is that on the other side of you? So we witness a desperate attempt to see Christ, a principle of renewal, redemption, life in this time and this place. It's a vision. The question is the vision illusion, delusion, or a truly redemptive prophetic vision of a possible redemption? Is the vision delusion or illusion, or on the other hand, a vision of redemptive possibility? The question arises, is the vision a mirage, a willed illusion, an illusion we yearn for so deeply that we see it, even though it doesn't exist? Or is it real? And if it's real, is it Christ, that principle of redemption? Or, the other guy who wears the hood, whose face you can't see, who points the finger and says, "It was the salmon moose." I'm quoting Monty Python. Death. Who's in the hood? Is it Luke or is it Darth? Is it Obi-Wan or is it Palpatine? You see what Lucas is doing? I mean, he went to school on this poem, Lucas did. He went to school on Joseph Campbell, who learned how to coordinate mythic utterances of cultures from Eliot, you see? And we're part of a tradition. When we watch Star Wars and dig these mythic personages engaged in their intercourse with one another, finding each other, losing each other, finding themselves, losing themselves, working together, failing to work together. And people complain about the repetitions in Star Wars, sort of the structural repetitions. In other words, this one's just like that one, just like that one. Of course it is, because that's us. That's who we are. Those mythic iterations of the human condition. You see? And that's why we made George Lucas the richest person on earth. Because he made myths for us in which we can see our human condition reflected upon us. So we read, note these questions that we read. The questions begin here, these interrogatives, these questions. Note the question marks. They're not declarative sentences. They're not declarative propositions. They're not statements. They're not certainties. They're questions. They're interrogatives, right? They express uncertain. They express not knowing. The language of the wasteland is the language of ambiguity, the language of uncertainty, the language of hermeneutic challenge, not hermeneutic solution, not hermeneutic self-convincedness. It's the language of uncertainty, fraught with ambiguity, fraught with complexity. If you've arrived at certainty, you are lying to yourself. If you've arrived at certainty, your eyes are not open. Okay, well, here we jump to stanza 4, and the apocalypse stanzas begin. So think of stanzas 4, 5, and 6, all three in a row, as the apocalypse stanzas. Here's where we see that, the dark half of that ambiguity, right? Apocalypse now commences in stanza 4. Dante's Inferno starts now. The language lapses into a despairing, lunatic litany, the language of destruction, like that of Revelations. It seems like it's practically lifted in terms of its symbolics, in terms of its linguistic field, right? The field from which the lexical choices are made is identical to that of Revelations, isn't it? They're dipping, Eliot and the author of Revelations, dipping into the same pool of lexical choices, of symbolic apparati. It's the stanza, it's an inversion of prayer, a litany of unanswerable questions in the face of doom. Line 375, the city's foundational to intellectual, theological, and artistic culture come crashing down in their emptiness and desolation. We feel not only civilization, but history itself falling down around us. And of course, we recognize the allusion. What is the city over the mountains? Cracks and reforms and bursts in the violet air, falling towers. Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, New York. Oh, sorry, New York's not in there. Those towers could never fall. Falling towers. Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London, unreal. So we see the consummation of Baudelaire's dark vision of the city as a kind of urban hell that cannot achieve meaning, that destroys, the destruction such that it cannot do anything other than destroy itself. Look at the next stanza, the 5th stanza. Oh, I got more on the cities here. These cities, the cities that Eliot names, doesn't name ours. He doesn't name the cities that he left behind. St. Louis, Eliot's birthplace, my city, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Nashville, Atlanta, Charlottesville, New York, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia. Unreal. Charlottesville, Chicago, Nashville, Memphis, James Earl Ray's Memphis, Mississippi, Selma, unreal. You see, you see the didactic outreach to us. We feel they're mythic. What Eliot is doing here is presenting us with myths, but the myths, God help us, apply to us now. Cities foundational to the intellectual, theological, and artistic culture come crashing down in their unreality. And this destruction completes Baudelaire's vision of their emptiness, their desolation. Just want to repeat that. Okay, takes us then to the fifth stanza. Note the ironic, macabre rhyming in this section, the sing-song irony that Eliot presents to us via those rhymes and those sing-song rhythms. We witness an apocalyptic nightmare vision of, first of all, blind, dehumanized terror. God, that line 380, bats with baby faces. Bats with baby faces in the violet light whistled and beat their wings and crawled head downward down a blackened wall. And upside down in air were towers, tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. Empty of the water that can save us, the world upside down. Remember Stranger Things and the upside down? That's Eliot's upside down here as well. Bats crawling head down, baby faces. So the blind, dehumanized terror, and then secondly, spiritual chaos and spiritual emptiness locked in helpless, hopeless reminiscence. That's what those reminiscent bells, that's why the bells are reminiscent, because they used to bring order. They used to bring beauty. They used to bring prayer. They used to bring us, they used to call us together. They used to measure the days out into manageable units and so on. All that now gone, upside down. Literally, the world is upside down, line 383, upside down. Shoot, I'm forgetting the characters in the upside down who can save us from the upside down. Can't remember the young woman's name, the bloody nose. When she conjures the rage that is power. You guys are saying the name to yourself. I wish you were in my class. I wish we were all together. We could all come up with the name. That's Eliot's upside down. Stanza 6 then, apocalypse reaches its logical and its eschatological conclusion. It presents culture as empty of any moral center, depleted of any abiding meaning, an absolute negative extremity. It's gone as far as it can. Culture has. The cock crows, right? Signaling the end of the night. The rain begins, but the ambiguity persists. What kind of day will the dawn bring? Will the rain be futile, cruel, like April? Will it be a cruel spring, a cruel season of a cruel redemption? Or will it be truly restorative, truly redemptive, truly a season of succor? Okay, so that's 4 through 6, the apocalypse now stanzas, right? Now, the other half of the vision, right? The dark apocalypse, and now we see the salvation stanza, the redemption stanza, okay? So here we have presented Eliot's vision of what can save, or more specifically, how we can save ourselves. Symbolically represented as a restoring rain, which makes life and growth possible once again. The poem again goes overtly didactic, reaching out to readers. Note the three imperatives. I mean, they're literally grammatical imperatives. They're in the imperative mood, not the indicative, not the subjunctive, but the imperative. They're telling us what to do. Three imperatives of this moral instruction are in Sanskrit, okay, and they're from the Hindu Upanishads. Why Sanskrit? Well, I should, you know the imperatives. Let me invoke them. Data, Dayadvam, Danyata. Love the way those sound, those resonate in the mouth and on the tongue and on the lips. Data, Dayadvam, Danyata. So we have the three imperatives of this moral instruction are in Sanskrit. Why Sanskrit? It's the language of the oldest Indo-European civilization and the oldest human truths are writ in it. That's the idea. This is the roots of human consciousness just beginning to know itself. Let me translate those for you. You have a translation of those imperatives. I take it in footnotes. Data, be generous. Some people translate this as give. I think be generous gets at it. Dayadvam, be sympathetic, be compassionate, be merciful. Right? Dayadvam, be sympathetic, be compassionate, be merciful. This is sort of the Sermon on the Mount imperative. Damyata, control yourself. Exercise self-restraint. Exercise self-discipline. Exercise self-control. Odysseus tied to the mast. He hears the songs of the sirens. He revels in the beauty of the songs of the sirens, but he protects himself from negative outcomes of that beauty. Beauty is always a risk, isn't it? Beauty is when we give ourselves when we give ourselves to beauty, we have to give ourselves to beauty very carefully under great self-control, because we can lose ourselves to beauty, can't we? The last thing we want to do is just say no. We never want to just say no to beauty. No, I blind myself to beauty. No, I blind my body to beauty. You want to indulge beauty, but you want to protect yourself in the indulgence, because the indulgence is always already dangerous. Have the beauty of the world, but have it on your own terms through self-restraint, self-control, self-discipline. And notice the secular quality. I'm going to check the time here. Notice the secular quality of these imperatives. They're behavioral. They're behavioral. They're about human behavior. And they speak directly to our human lives in relation to one another. And they do not presume to speak to a deity, right? Ganja was sunken and the limp leaves waited for rain, while the black clouds gathered far distant over Himavant, that's the Himalayas. The jungle crouched, humped in silence. Then spoke the thunder. Da. I love that monosyllabic, resonant utterance from the deepest, most profound well of our environment, the context of our humanity. Da, the thunder. And that da gives way then to da yad vam, I have heard the key, data, what have we given? How have you been generous? How have you been generous? See the imperative there? Da yad vam. I have heard the key turn in the door once. Note the footnote reference to Ugolino and Archbishop Ruggieri in Dante's Inferno. Horrific scene, probably my favorite scene in the Inferno. Horrific. It's Ugolino gnawing the head of the man that locked him and his sons in a tower and starved them all to the point that he had to eat his sons in order to stay alive. And here in hell, Ugolino is punishing Ruggieri. It's a moment of vengeance, righteous vengeance, slaking itself. And he's eating the head of the person who caused this to happen, an archbishop. Except you realize when you see it, who's really being punished here? Isn't it the act of vengeance itself that dehumanizes and punishes itself? Even worse than the original act that it's intended to punish? Do you see? It's the punishment that dehumanizes, the mercilessness, the compassionlessness, the failure of generosity. See, this is what the Sermon on the Mount is meant to speak against as well. How do we liberate ourselves from vengeance that would dehumanize us? Turn in the door once and turn once only. We think of the key, each in his prison, thinking of the key. Each confirms a prison. We spend our lives locked in ourselves. We spend our lives locked in ourselves, narcissistic, self-absorbed, self-involved, able to only to see the world through our own eyes, able to only see the world as the locale in which our own desires might be satisfied, lost in our self-involvement, in our solipsism. We spend our lives locked in ourselves, contemplating only ourselves. But if you open the door in a moment of mercy, if you open the door in a moment of compassion, if you open the door indeed in a moment of self-examination, you can renew your life like a king once broken, now restored, like Shakespeare's Coriolanus that Eliot quotes in a minute, like Lear that Eliot has been quoting throughout the poem. Only in moments of mercy, only in moments of compassion can we turn the key to let us out of the prison we make for ourselves, the prison of our righteous vengeance, the prison of our anger, the prison of our narcissism, the prison of our solipsism. Whew. Well, we come to the final stanza, and it's an ambiguous end. So we've seen the Apocalypse stanzas, and then we've seen the Sanskrit stanzas, the Upanishad stanzas that present the other side of the coin, the other possibility, a restorative, redemptive reign, not a cruel April, but an April of succor and fulfillment, right? The two possibilities still ambiguous, right? So we come to the final stanza, and it's an ambiguous end to an ambiguous eschatology, right? That was pretty good. An ambiguous end to an ambiguous eschatology, this stanza. And it's a tour de force of allusion. Now, I'm not going to explain it all again, but you guys have heard me talk about allusion and what these serial allusions accomplish for the imagist, right? And also for Eliot, Pound. All ages are contemporaneous. All literatures tell us the story of our humanity. I like the way Star Wars starts out, you know, you guys know the lines better than I do, but a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Of course, it's a long time ago because our humanity never leaves us, you see? And the narratives that embody, that express, that present our humanity are always relevant to us, most profoundly, and link us to the traditions with which we explore our humanity. So the final stanza, stanza 8, the previous oppositional visions of, on the one hand, moral chaos, right? And on the other hand, moral orientation have been just that, visions. So they're Eliot's imagining, right? Visions. Like Tiresias, like Sybil. This last stanza reasserts our wasteland ontological condition and does so in a form which echoes its disjunct, contradictory, ambiguous, anxious uncertainty. So in other words, y'all, it's a modernist form. It's a form that enacts rather than represents the human condition. It embodies, it enacts, it presents rather than represents. And it's that those juxtapositions of highly allusive images and language and ideas that catalyze the brilliant image that this last stanza constitutes, right? That this last stanza contains, yeah? So what is our condition? We are creatures of hope, fishing for meaning. There's that image of the Fisher King, which we've seen in different places. We see it again here. We are creatures of hope, fishing for meaning on the shores of a land of futility. Our position is one of utter contingency. We're fishing for meaning. We're engaged in the hermeneutic enigma that marks our humanity, looking for meanings, fishing like Gollum for the precious that will save us. God help us in our uncertainty. Smeagol, willing to strangle Deagol if he gets in our way at our worst. That's us at our worst. I love that oscillation that Smeagol goes through, you know, the best of him, the worst of him, the best of him, the worst of him in conflict. Pretty powerful. The book, of course, blows away the movies. But see, Tolkien's working with the same sense of myth. Exactly the same sense of myth. And we won't do it, but you can go through and see it at work very explicitly in The Lord of the Rings. The myths of the West at work. We are creatures of hope, fishing for meaning on the shores of a land of futility. Our position, one of utter contingency. We are torn between, on the one hand, silently accepting our mortal ruin, the ruin of our civilization, in evidence all around us. London, this is what the reference to London Bridge falling is, and the reference to the Prince of Aquitaine, right? Make sure you follow the footnotes. I'm not going to have time to go through each one, but make sure you get to them. That's why London Bridge, that's why the Prince of Aquitaine quotes. And also that's first. And then secondly, yearning to express our condition. to express our condition in poems like this one and in other ways. So we hear this yearning in, the great Philomel quote, translating, when shall I be? I told you the Philomel story, right? So Eliot goes back to it here, as he does, right? It's the Easter egg, right? It's the reference that he's already established, coming back to it, creating sort of an integral form, fragmentary in units, but integral as a whole. Beautiful, right? Contingent yet organic, fragmentary yet organized. Yeah, I keep thinking about those sonnets that you find in the poem. These moments of organization, ironic, but formal. You see, formally astute, formally aware, drawing the expression of the poem together in moments. Other moments utterly fragmentary. Look at this last stanza. So we're yearning to express our condition in poems just like this one, and we hear this yearning in the Philomel quote, when shall I be like the swallow and cease to be silent? God, let them carve that into our tombstones. We who are quiet, who've learned to keep our mouths shut. We who've learned not to raise our voices on our own behalf. We who've learned not to raise our voices on the behalf of others because of what the world does to those who do. Memphis, Chicago, Selma, unreal. When shall I be like the swallow and cease to be silent? When will I raise my voice? When will I fight again? When will I stand up for myself and for my brother and my sister? Again. So we hear that yearning in the Philomel quote, and we also hear in the quote from Kids, the Spanish tragedy. Make sure you check the footnote. That play in which a father writes a play, an act of self-expression, an act of voice, an art, a poem, so to speak, an act of self-expression of the voice of the swallow. A play in which a father writes a play and acts. So it's a play about a father who writes a play and acts a part in it that he's written in it for himself that allows him to avenge the loss, to avenge his own son's murder. So it's an act of art that results in justice. When will we be capable of producing an art like this? Because at least if we can articulate, it's possible for us to be understood. So the stanza ends with a reassertion of the three imperatives, data, dayadvam, damyata, of moral organization, fragments of a personal and a social moral order, a personal, a social, a spiritual moral order that seems doubtful more often than it seems possible, that moral order. And a repeated whisper, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That repetition occurs at the end of one of the Upanishads. Translating it is difficult, but it's a word that you'd say to someone who's crying, but you know that what they're crying about, you can't do anything about. So it's a word you say to comfort. I don't know that we have the equivalent. Eliot translated as the peace that passeth all understanding. I could see what he means, the peace that passeth all understanding. In other words, be at peace. I can't bring you the meaning that you need. I can't solve the conditions of human loss for you, but I can put my arms around you and bring you peace. So in that word peace, you hear something desperate, something exhausted. It's a word that partly expresses a kind of resignation to that which cannot be overcome, that loss, that sorrow, that suffering, the human condition, mortality that cannot be overcome. And on the other hand, it is a whisper of abiding peace, those two syllables. It's a peace that would alleviate pain and alleviate suffering, but not eliminate its cause, and its cause, our humanity. Shanti.